a large introduction, but I want to welcome her so much. I'm going to share a screen and I'm going to make you a co-host. So you're able to share your screen, and then also I'm going to spotlight your video. Hopefully, if I can. Let's see, we're going to, hold on. I'm going to, there we go.
I did.
I don't know why my video is spotlighted.
Can you see my slide?
I can see your slide, but I don't know why they're.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Let me just make sure I've got. I'm gonna.
Yeah.
There we go, and it is not letting me spotlight her video. Is your video on?
Yeah. Okay. Can I?
I don't think your video is on. There we go.
Okay. So, thank you, Stephen. I'm very sorry for what happened to my computer. Okay. And thank you, Stephen, for inviting me. And thanks very much to introduction. And I'm honored to be with you today to speak of sociology and the Holocaust, better of the history of sociology of the Holocaust. Let me begin with a phrase, quote, under what circumstances do the people let the others get away with such actions? These words are of Everett Charrington Hughes, 1948. He's a sociologist of the Chicago School and permitted to enter the sociology of the Holocaust. Actually, the sociology of the Holocaust didn't obtain the same level of attention among scholars. And it's important, our question today is this, why the sociology of the Holocaust? It's a complicated issue because in presenting the history of the sociology of the Holocaust, namely the main scholars, the theories, the sociological theories, the sociological works that deal with the destruction of the Jews and its related themes as resistance, anti-Semitism, ghetto, and so on, will focus on what scholars mostly agreed, that there had been a delay of sociology in studying the genocide of the Jews. Actually, I can't analyze here with you today the so-called delay of sociology affirmed among the scholars at the 2001 conference at Rutgers University, when starts the interest of the sociology of the Holocaust. It's a problematical issue because, and it isn't at the moment our goal, but what is important is that, and the quick perusal of the sociological literature today will demonstrate this, is that sociology hasn't absolutely on delay. By sifting sociological works and sources, it's evident that several sociological sociologists approach the Holocaust, and not only after 1945, but even during and before the World War II. Let me start with the essential concept of about the sociology of the Holocaust. What is it? When started? Which scholars can be defined as sociologists? And which tools are adopted. For example, I cannot see my slide, so sorry for this. But what is important to situate the unfamiliar status of the sociological perspective in the context of familiar ones. My examination of a post-Holocaust sociology follows a chronological order. There is maybe, yeah, okay. It's helpful, the chronological order, to understand how sociological works change in the different decades and in the light of the events, political, academic, happened during the same decades. How can I arrive, this is another important question, at the history of Holocaust sociology? By visiting internet archives, databases, online academic reviews, it's possible to peruse whatever Holocaust sources, papers, articles, books, and the reading of the academic positions together with the scholarly publications allows to enter into academic realm and interread the scientific context that accounts for the conditions for the dissemination of research topics on the genocide of the Jews of Europe and its related themes. Coming back to the importance of the chronological order, we can delineate for any decade the key concept typical of sociology concerned with the Holocaust. And let me begin with the period 1945-1960s. I'd say a lot, but to respect the time, in order to illustrate the main steps of the history of the sociology of the Holocaust, I have to select for any school and author their most salient sociological works dealing with the Holocaust. And for any of these works, I have to select the most significant points, passages. This means that I can't analyze deeply any work, obviously, and that I'm going to make sweeping generalization to get its point across. However, this is necessary. A brief premise. In accordance with two important historians, Cicerani and Hilberg, the Holocaust actually started in the 1930s with the anti-Jewish measures. And the intellectuals in question were mainly European scholars who, forced to leave Germany in 1933, took refuge in the United States or in the South of America, for example, the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt, or the Italian Renato Treves from Italy to Argentina. Among these texts is very crucial the work of Erich Fromm, Escape from Freedom, 1941, because these works analyzes anti-Semitism in the United States. Okay, coming back to the period 1945 and 1960s, we can read the works of Frankfurt School and of Chicago School. The common thread running through them and uniting them revolved around the concept of totalitarian power, on which the cited authors reflect through the categories of totalitarian order and anti-Semitic discrimination and prejudice. While the main question is what reasons led good people to consent to the policy of National Socialist racial hygiene. Let me be precise that although this is the slide, yeah, although works such as dialectic of enlightenment, anti-Semitism, and eclipse of reason, although these works have different focuses, they do, however, all share an anti-Semitic view. And about the anti-Semitism among American labor, it's an important work written at the end of the Second World War. It was remained unpublished. And in the research, the concept of scapegoat is crucial, and the prejudice is presented as the element building the totalitarian society. The prejudice, in particular, this author explains that is manipulated in favor of a political fascist plan and orientation to absorb social and economic tension. The Frankfurt School gave the face of a mass totalitarian society to anti-Semitism in the 1940s. What means? That the individual, when it seems he is enjoying maximum of his freedom or independence, is instead deprived of his critical thinking. And rather than being a distinguished person among many individuals, he is compelled to share a common mentality, a mutual personality, to not be an individual anymore. We can consider minima moralia, negative dialectics. In addition to these scholars, there is a particular sociologist, Talcott Parsons, because Talcott Parsons in 1942, maybe, let me, no, I cannot, okay. I'm trying to see the slide. Oh, okay. I try to remember. In pre-Nazi Germany, he explains this in 1942 in particular, many political factors, religious sentiments, and social and economic tensions led in the Weimar Republic to the rise of Nazi power, and consequently to the collapse of the Republic and the establishment of the Third Reich. Jews were considered the supporters of the modernity, given that they practiced all the professions typical of modernity, and consequently they were an ongoing social problem. What happened in 1946 and 1948? Parsons stopped to say anything, literally anything, about what happened in Europe. And after his longer period as a political activist engaged in denouncing Nazi power. I'd say a lot, but I cannot now, so maybe later in another session, with pleasure, I explain his particular figure in academic realm, because his activities, his research activity is a conundrum. It's a problematical issue, and I dedicate an entire chapter of my book to this personality. Okay, let me retrace instead what two other scholars of the Chicago School, Shields and Janowitz, scholars of the Chicago School, elaborate. In particular, they link in a sociological way, just using the categories of social cohesion, and primary group when they refer to Wehrmacht and the sociological tool of obedience to authority and solidarity when they speak about or refer to Hitler and the NSDAP. They link the German army to Nazism and the Holocaust. From interviews conducted with the German prisoners emerged this, that Hitler was the one who could ensure economic security after the difficult period of the Weimar years. According to the concept of the authoritarian personality, the Wehrmacht took the place of the father figure in society for the younger Nazi fanatics. Both Schills and Janowitz stressed how to obey an authority in the name of the Second Reich's honor code. People favored the advent of Nazi power. Joining the Wehrmacht, in fact, were young people and adults with economic difficulties during the Weimar Republic, who hoped to find, with the advent of a national socialism, a solution to their material economic problems. Let's go ahead with the Lipset. Lipset fathomed the conditions of that prepared the breeding ground for the authoritarian turn within a liberal political system. For this reason, Lipset studied the social basis of electoral support for the NSDAP, namely, who voted for Hitler and who supported Nazi totalitarianism and its policy of racial hygiene. The starting point is the analysis of Hitler's electoral constituency in the years 1928-1933. Hitlerism enjoyed a broad consensus because it ensured economic security. Go ahead. Okay. There are many variables causes of them. Let's go ahead with Hughes, our Hughes of the beginning. In adopting the category of the division of labor in Chicago's modern industry, Hughes creates a model finding similarities and differences between the SS, Nazis, and ordinary people. He reflects on the topic of ordinary perpetrators, adopting the analytical scheme of the division of labor. Why the division of labor? Especially because in so doing it brilliantly elaborates the category of banality of evil. When industrial workers in Chicago obey their superiors, they incorporate the logic of subordination. They tacitly transfer the power relations embodied in obeying superiors in industry to their everyday actions. The tendency to embody this power disposition is invisible as an imperceptible force that compels the workers to become complicit in their subordination. The culture of the division of labor prompts an individual to blindly perform one isolated task, usually oblivious to its consequences. It was in Chicago that Hughes saw at first hand the alienating effect of a workforce so rigidly subdivided that its members often had little or no contact with the final product they were working to build. The ordinary executioners or the ordinary man Browning describes bear an unmistakable resemblance to the men doing dirty work described by Everett Hughes. They are normal, middle-aged Germans who permitted and even enabled the cold-blooded execution of countless human beings. The publication of Hughes' articles, I'd like to go ahead with the slide. Oh. I cannot. Okay. Sorry, a minute. Okay, maybe. Okay. The publication, of Hughes' article coincided with Arendt's New Yorker articles on the Eichmann trial, which she collected in book form the following year under the title The Banality of Evil, 1963. Arendt's and Hughes' text intersects on many points. The evil perpetrated under the Nazis isn't radical, but emerging from everyday life, something ordinary, cultivated among neighbors. Hughes' evildoers were people committed to doing their duty and following orders within a bureaucratic system, such as the modern workers in industries in Chicago. Let's go through the 1970s, when sociology changed in a little less than a decade. What happened historically and consequently sociologically? The echo of the Third Arab-Israeli War, 1967, continued to resound in the world. When the fear of another Holocaust brought Fackenheim at Auschwitz in the 1940s and at Jerusalem in 1967, Jews were singled out and alone, unquote. This fear impelled people to stand up against another destruction, and the Vietnam War, with its oppositional dynamics between a liberal and socialist world, ricocheted in a sociological thought. In addition, we have to remember the outbreak of the Yom Kippur War and the international economic crisis of 1973. Sociology of the 1970s also went through a phase of divisions within the discipline as a result of interdisciplinary influences to the leading that leads to the birth of new fields of sociology. Particularly in this period emerged the importance of the sociology of organization and movements. And we can see how these tools of movement and organization are adopted by sociologists to explain the anti-Nazi activities, the resistance, for example. In the wake of the Chicago School, we can find Pawęczenska. Pawęczenska is a Polish sociologist, an Auschwitz survivor, and uses the concepts of space, physical and social, and of time to explore the community of prisoners in the Auschwitz systems. For Pawęczenska, inside the Auschwitz camp, a destructive force, to which she gives the name of violence, and a reactive force made up of bonds of solidarity, which takes the name of values, unfold. She reports the cases in which, through small and, quote, stubborn, unquote, acts of resistance and friendship, prisoners at Auschwitz fought against the authority of the legitimate terror and against all forms of demoralization. And Zelia Heller, another Polish sociologist, okay, Zelia is here. Yeah. explains that the Polish nationalism is the main cause of the destruction of the Jews in Poland, starting from the sociological concept of age. That, on the one hand, recalls the concept of limit, territorial division, and on the other hand, recalls the national claims of various ethnic groups present in the area, in addition to the anti-Semitic practices and policies. While sociology, okay, maybe if I cannot. I'm trying the slide. Okay. After this, okay. Steven?
Yes.
Yeah. You have my slide, maybe. I sent you.
Let me see. Let me get my, let me open my, if I do, then I can do your.
Yeah, because maybe, okay, I try to.
Yes, let me get into my, I will send them, let me just open them up really quick. And I see where you sent it to me.
That's good. Okay,
oops, and there goes my. I don't know all the technical, but I mean, so far, I mean, I'm just amazed.
Okay, maybe I found it. I found them. Okay, more, maybe. Okay, there's a lot.
You did find it? No worries. I've got.
Okay. The 24. Yeah, okay. Well, sociology, sorry.
It's not showing up. I don't think your screen is not being shared. You got to reshare your screen.
Okay. Well, sociology as a discipline was undergoing. Can you see the slide?
No, your screen isn't shared right now. I don't think you need to reshare your. Yeah, click on your screen share.
Okay,
at the bottom.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Okay. I'm
still not. So I'm just.
Now?
There we go.
Yeah,
now
okay.
we go. There we go. We're live. We're live. It's all good.
It's a difficult lecture.
I understand.
While sociology as a discipline was undergoing statistic influences, the Harvard scholar Moore focuses on the Nazi Germany and toward those who were the social basis of obedience and revolt. He studies, starting from the notion of the German working class and on the basis of the census of employment in 1933, he studies those who have obeyed an unfair power and those who instead have challenged authority, trying in the latter case to trace the social causes that led to the rebellion. These individuals, by virtue of the fact that they have little power and scarce resources, should be the first in the society to feel a sense of injustice and to perceive, for instance, when authority becomes abuse of power and when goods and services are not distributed fairly. The question is, therefore, why the social basis of German society didn't rebel against Nazi totalitarianism, an extreme case of social injustice, and on the contrary, actually supported it. The answer is in the post-World War I, where and when the explosion of a strong social resentment inflamed the downfall of the Weimar. This repressive aspect of moral outrage was finally channeled into the Nazi ranks. To Moore, the origins of this sense of injustice date back to 1848 and persisted until the 1920. The National Socialist Party, or better, program of February 24, 1920, offered a real and salutary solution to the social workers who felt themselves morally outraged by the existing social orders and victims of the liberal capitalism of the Weimar Republic. In reading instead Accounting for Genocide, okay, I have again the problem with the slide. I'm so sorry for this. The 25 is my computer is blocked. I don't know why. Okay. If you prefer, Stephen, you can use my slide. Yeah, it's better.
Yeah, here, real, and I do have to ask real quick. If it's okay, Richard, do you mind terribly if we go over just a little bit? You could unmute. Yeah. And Richards, are you? I'm trying to see if he's on and can hear me over.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, is it okay if we're a little bit over?
Of course, that'd be fine.
I want to see if you mind, and everyone else, hopefully, if you're okay with that. And I'm gonna open this presentation that Dr. Messina sent and see if that's okay. I like your space background. I'm just gonna go see if I can open this up and be able to share it. Actually, I've got I don't know, the odd.
I stopped my.
Yeah, here, I'm gonna share mine. I'm gonna, although this is oddly a PPT, and let me just view my screen a little bigger here. And I'm gonna scroll down here. I'm gonna you tell me, I'm gonna share my screen, and we're gonna
from the 25 slide, you can
here, just tell me which number of slide, where are we at?
Yeah, 25 maybe. Yeah, no, maybe it's okay.
25.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see.
Thank you, Stephen.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Okay, are we about here or here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Among the main point of this program of 1920, there is a particular concept. A citizen of the state, we can read maybe, can only be one who belongs to the popular community for Canosse, and for Canosse can be only one who is of German blood. Without any regard to religious affiliation. Therefore, I'm quoting, no Jew can be for Canosse. And okay, slide 26. Thank you. In reading Accounting for Genocide, by Helen Fein, one finds the mathematical and statistical influences characterizing the state of sociological studies of the period. And the main famous questions evolves around the concept of a nation state. Specifically, how nation states behave when faced with the destruction of the Jews, and which factors lead the nation state to practice a genocide, how a particular group becomes vulnerable and subject to the genocidal process. Among the most exposed to persecution, massacres, discrimination, are communities that don't hold strong bonds with the dominant political group. It has the persons excluded from the acquisition of civil and political rights and the form relations of goods exchange. This exclusion of the Jews from the juridical and political bonds indicated by the success of the pre-war anti-Semitic movements, and from the absence of a strong government capable of protecting the civil rights and the political liberties of the Jews, elucidates why states cooperated with the Nazis, allowing anti-Jewish policies. And Fein shows the speed of the destruction of the Jews in Europe, within each state of Europe, using the intensity of German control over occupied European states in satellite or allied states, and B, using the level of anti-Semitism present in the same territories in the period before the World War. So, for example, thanks to the presence of strong,
My bad.
No, okay. Yeah. You can go.
No, go ahead.
No, okay. To the presence of strong bonds of national solidarity in countries such as Denmark, located in what Hilberg calls, quote, the semicircular arc, where there was a low percentage of, sorry for the French, percentage of anti-Semitic movements. And the number of deaths reported, in fact, was not high. Okay, the next, please. The 80s were crucial years. Why? The massacres and atrocities of a nationalistic nature committed in many countries and reported by mass media raises questions. What is a genocide? As Azovsky stresses in the Order of Terror, you can go with the next. It's possible with the aid of an experienced bureaucratic administration, and using Antonio Cassese, these acts have been made possible by the modern state. And the policy of genocide was devised and planned by the central authorities of the state. This policy of genocide was performed through the use of modern mass of communication, for example, by trains for deportations. The next, Lenkin formulated the concept of genocide at the 1933 conference in Madrid. However, in his Axis Rule in Occupied Europe, 1944, for the first time he advances the notion of genocide as a practice of extermination of nations and ethnic groups. Lenkin played an important role in the trials against Nazi war criminals before the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, and equally important was his contribution in the debates on genocide in the United Nations, culminating, for example, in the resolution of 1946 and of 1948. The next slide. According to this resolution, genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy.
Am I with this one?
The slide maybe 32, maybe.
This is the convention for the Princeton.
Yeah, convention of the genocide. Yeah. It's okay. Thank you. To destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. The letter D is very interesting. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. It's extremely linked to the etymon of the genocide. Looking at it, there are the Greek words genos and gignomai, that means that translate the sense of be born, to originate, and so the meaning of generating. Instead, the final suffix cidio refers to the Greek word kteino, that means to kill. So genocide literally renders the phrase killing life in any sense. And Cooper's work, Genocide, of 1981, explains how in the 20th century, genocide, this is very crucial, had been used by national governments as a screen to maintain the internal order or national sovereignty over a specific territory. When he affirms that, quote, the word genocide is new, but the crime is ancient, unquote, he means exactly that genocide returns when the United Nations defends or restores the rights of the individual state. Let's go ahead to Katz, okay, our Dr. Katz. He's introduced the concept of appendage of the machine, which Bauman will use later, and in the wake for some aspects of Hughes. He explains how the work of the specialists of death is very similar to the work of the employees in the assembly line, where it isn't the production of a commercial product at stake, but rather human death. For Katz, these men, specialists of death, were officials performing the command to kill in a systematic and planned process of elimination. Death was administered through a corps of bureaucrats in charge of the chain of murder and obedient to authority. The next, Nehama Tetz analyzes the death process in telling her own personal history in Dry Tears. Although Tetz's works explain different stories, the common interpretative notion is the unexplored concept of resistance. The next, Bauman's Modernity and the Holocaust is considered by most, at the famous conference of 2001, for example, the work that woke up post-Holocaust sociology in 1989. What pushed him to modernity and the Holocaust was indeed the sociological concept of social suffering, even before the concept of nation state. So, what was a suffering for Bauman in a modern world? The topic of human suffering began to become a recurring argument in his works because of his experience of exile, when the Polish anti-Semitism that broke out in Poland at the end of the 1960s led to his expulsion from academic position. It was 1968. And the issue of anti-Semitism at this point became central in the life of Bauman, who at the end of the 80s, by reading Winter in the Morning by Janina Bauman, her wife, shifted the object of social suffering from the tension between the working class and the spoiled producers to that of Jews who experienced the Holocaust. The concept of social suffering is a moral evil. We can go on with the slide, Stephen. Thank you. Is a moral evil born in and caused by social relationships. It means that men can intervene, indeed they must do so, to limit the effects of suffering caused by their own interactions. Bauman, in a period in which sociology as an academic discipline focused mostly on economic inequality and social suffering after the fall of the Berlin Wall, was in step with the sociology dealing with the post-industrial doctrines. Bauman's sociological lesson, in a nutshell, attracts scholars because A, he considers modernity the primary historical cause of the destruction of the Jews, and B, he makes the Holocaust modern. In which way? Its lesson is based on the rationality principle, namely, the bureaucratic apparatus is used to implement the ideological project of a perfect social order, which demands and legitimates contemporarily the instrumental goal for the destruction of the Jews. Precisely. The Holocaust is introduced as a product of modernity, where the modern state is a perfect garden and a gardener, not allowing any spontaneous growth unauthorized. And genocide, in this way, can be conceived as a work of gardening, while the state gardener eliminates any element that harms its garden. In this perspective, the action of eradicating the genocide becomes a creative and non-destructive work. His lessons, the efficiency of the modernity of the Holocaust, is questioned by recent historiography. Possible after the end of the communism, as demonstrated by the debate resulting from the publication in 2000 of a Goss volume on the massacre of the Polish Jewish community in Jedwabne on July 10, 1941. Especially after the fall, the next slide, please, Stephen. I'm cutting, no worries. Especially after the fall of the Berlin Wall, sociology itself is contaminated with other disciplines, and the post-Holocaust sociology followed this trend. For example, the theme of the Holocaust started to be analyzed with the supplementary issues, such as the experience of second-generation survivors. However, from the end of the Cold War, it becomes possible to account for, step by step, any nation story and any national Holocaust history. Scholars were now able to elaborate the past without the shadow of the Cold War ideas. As well stressed by Daniel Levy and Nathan Schneider, quote, the end of the Cold War has led to a fundamental change in the parameters of collective memories in Europe and made possible attempts to produce shared cosmopolitan memories, unquote. In the last 20 years, Holocaust sociology has differed from the earlier tradition, both in perspective and in research methods. The works of this period, elaborated in the most intense moment of the globalization process, have been affected by the global dimension. This means that they present a multidimensional view, not referring to a physical space and having no ties with a specific territory. Specifically, the post-Holocaust sociology of globalization is new because we pass from the national collective memory to a cosmopolitan memory. So, what do we mean by national collective memory? Maybe it is the slide 42 or 43, Stephen.
Okay. Oh, we're
Okay.
not. I'm losing it. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, maybe it's a slide in yellow. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. National collective memory is a set of traces of the past that one social group transmits from one generation to the next. in connection with their own traditions and history. Concerned with the Holocaust, this means that what it refers to what happened within a well-established national boundaries, Europe, and in a given time, the 20th century. The persons concerned are the Germans as the perpetrators of mass murder and the Jews as victims. What is relevant is remembering that Europe and the 20th century constitute two central sociological tools of space and time used by the Chicago School, for example, and used to identify a given phenomenon within precise boundaries. This demarcation uses the same elements of time and space used to define conceptually the modern nation state. The next, 43 maybe, the confessional concepts, I quote, of a collective memory is firmly embedded within the container of the nation state. So, in a nutshell, in a very nutshell, we may speak of national memory when the event which has to be remembered recalls the same schema that defines the nation state. While the cosmopolitan memory coincides with the elements of postmodernity, it has with the elements of the globalization. The foundations for a new cosmopolitan memory, a memory transcending ethnic and national boundaries, is an event that permits the recognition of the otherness, so the Holocaust. And this event must belong to every inhabitant of the world. In which way is it possible? Because this process of globalization of memory leads to the constitution of citizenship no longer based on the concept of state, nation, or the founding needs of race, but on the unique sharing of human suffering. And Levy and Schneider, for example, address a cosmopolitan collective responsibility that makes each victim or perpetrator of crimes a citizen of the world and no longer only of the state where genocide happens. So the Holocaust is now a concept that has been dislocated from space and time, I'm quoting, precisely because it can be used to dramatize any act of injustice, racism, or crime perpetrated anywhere on the planet. For example, when Levi Schneider coined the term Kosovo Coast, or Kosovo Coast in 2000, or stated that, quote, slowly over the course of the Bosnian conflict, the US public came to identify the Serbs with the Nazis, unquote. They helped to deterritorialize and detemporalize any suffering, recognizing all the victims of any ethnic nationalism. In addition, for Alexander and other sociologists, the universal symbol of human suffering that cannot be denied and whose elaboration can serve to establish bonds of solidarity among individuals, it has a collective identity, it's a trauma, a historical injustice that, in order to become a cultural fact, it must become a social representation, precisely a tragedy. And the performance of a tragedy is a cultural structure that allows for the giving of a name to the suffering, for calculating its weight in time and space, and for identifying the protagonistic victims and the antagonistic persecutors. As in the Greek theater, the suffering is transferred. Let's go on to close the post-Holocaust sociology because the time is over. We can remember Vromen and Rachel Heimfoner. In particular, Heimfoner is important because she described the resistance in Warsaw, in Łódź, and in Vilna using the categories of social proximity, collective identity, power structure, and cultural ignorance. Just to give you a brief example, Heimfoner emphasized the resistance was possible in Warsaw, and that at that time Jews were able to obtain information on the Nazis' genocidal plans, and only when such information had become credible in the collective consciousness. In Warsaw, she explains, the resistance was planned and realized because Chernyakov, the leader, didn't join consensus within the community. His orders were not heard. Instead, in Łódź, where ignorance about the genocide, about genocidal news was institutionalized, that is, the false news was constructed as a truth to become credible in the public opinion of residents of the ghetto, credence was not given to reports regarding massacres. So they had a conceptual tool of cultural ignorance. The ignorance became value binding for individuals and slowly turned into a legitimate cultural ignorance. I'd like to close this very quick peruse of sociological literature dealing with the Holocaust with the most important sociological tool. It's the last slide, Stephen, please.
Okay.
And the last, yeah. And it is on the human suffering, because I cannot read. Can I ask you, Stephen, to read for me, please?
Sure.
Because the human suffering is the unique.
About human suffering?
Yeah.
Theater is a necessity. The orchestra is a symbol of the world. There is a total identification of the public, which makes its own a reality that has already existed, symbolically placed in the center. At the same time, is at the center of the orchestra of the world. When suffering is transferred, it is possible to comprehend what happened to human beings from other human beings.
Yeah, that's empathy, and it explains the passage from the national collective memory to the suffering of any human being. Thank you for your attention, and I'm very sorry for this, for what happened to my computer.
Thank you so much for speaking today. So is it okay if you're in the Huva, if you could, I'm going to close everything out and bring in Dr. Plotniks but I'd like, if you want to ask any questions later on. I know that was a lot to take in for everyone. I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and then everyone will just need to come back in for the next sessions. That way we can have this one recorded and posted for anybody who wants to be able to see it. Thank you guys so much. Sorry for going over, and we'll go over today a little more. I'll see you guys in just a minute. Thank you so much, Dr. Messina, for joining us today. Get this out.